David said, I'm Collier. I'm one of the executive directors in the Cabinet Office with a procurement portfolio. I'm also the Government's Deputy Chief Procurement Officer. And this is my first day back from 2.5 weeks leave. So if I stare wistfully into space, or I don't appear to know which way is up, then let's blame it on that today if you give me that opportunity. Can I have a show of hands? Who's in the public sector, please? Who's in the private sector? Who's in procurement? Okay, so we've got a real mix. The next 20 minutes or so, I'm just going to give a broad canter over largely central government's activity in the procurement space at the moment, and boy oh boy, is it a busy one. So to give you a flavour of what's going on, I'll use the slides as a bit of a prop. You can take what you will from them. Okay, the Cabinet Office and its role in public procurement. The responsibility for public procurement has oscillated over the years between the Treasury and the Cabinet Office. Under the last administration, we were procurement in the Treasury. I myself have been in procurement for many years. I started in the procurement department at Her Majesty's Prison in Norwich, probably around 20 years ago. So I absolutely love it. I think it can't be a better time to be in procurement. I've probably said that on several previous occasions on these platforms, but it really is. One minister was known to describe this subject as this obscure corner of the world. Well, I'm really grateful that it's actually not as obscure as it once was, and we actually get now more time and attention from ministers and all sorts of commentators than we ever did. And for someone like me, that's great. In the Cabinet Office, I'm in the Efficiency and Reform Group. The Efficiency and Reform Group is a new bringing together of various functions in the Cabinet Office to tackle that, to help to tackle that very large deficit. Those figures have probably changed since that original graph was drawn up. How are we doing in terms of the Efficiency and Reform Group? We'll come on to in a minute. The need for procurement reform, what was wrong in terms of 9-10 baselines? Well, we certainly weren't leveraging our spend, and we've been at this for a while in terms of leveraging central government spend. And we've done a lot of cooperation and trying to bring people together. Actually, what's happened under the latest administration is that we've had much stronger controls and mandates from the centre to leverage that spend, and you'll see how we're doing in a minute. Procurement's certainly too complex and too long. Far too much reliance on consultants, and apologies to the consultants in the room. Actually, what happened was we were relying on large teams of consultants to run complex procurements, almost on every occasion. And in government, there were very few teams of civil servants who could run themselves very large, complex procurements. That's changing, and that's good for those of us in the procurement profession. Big was beautiful. I think we have to say there's been a pendulum swing. There had been over recent years to some larger suppliers, and that's not a bad thing. But I think that there is an absolute place for smaller suppliers to actually provide better value, more flexibility, more innovation. And again, we're seeing that now in some fantastic case studies coming through, which prove that it can be done. And let's not beat about the bush. There are still plenty of cynics, plenty of people who say it can't be done. Well, it can, and it's actually happening. Lack of data. Getting excellent quality data in procurement is probably the absolute foundation. If you don't have good quality data, how can you do anything? How can you aggregate? How can you determine who are your strategic suppliers and who needs to do? It's just absolutely fundamental. And when John Collington was the Chief Procurement Officer, he had an absolute determined focus on getting the data right. And it's miles better than it was a few years ago, but it's still incredibly difficult. 200,000 suppliers. We're trying to, this is the kind of scale of the data we are trying to grapple with. Have those reforms, are they being successful? You may or may not have seen publicity recently about the 5.5 billion the latest savings achieved on top of the 3.75 billion the previous year. Overseen by Francis Maude, who is the Minister for Procurement. Francis Maude, in my history in government, is the minister that gets it. He absolutely understands procurement. If you want to go and talk to him about any aspect of procurement, he absolutely understands it, is engaged, is determined to drive through these reforms. He was a minister in a previous government many years ago that implemented one of the first sets of procurement legislation, which again, to be able to talk to a minister where you can talk to him about the minutiae of procurement directives, for me, is absolutely fantastic. But as he said here, this is not the sexy end of politics. It is about the minutiae of procurement and financial management. So, here's how the savings break down. You probably can't see those on the screen, but 5.5 billion, and I'm glad to say that these figures have been audited by my colleagues in front row in the NAO. If I just read out some of them, reduction in marketing spend, 387 million, supply negotiations, 437 million, savings from centralised procurement, 422 million. These are very big numbers, and actually a very large proportion of them come from procurement, or from either from stopping doing something, and arguably the central controls have contributed a lot to that, or by doing things differently, in a different way. And these savings will continue. The current landscape, I've talked about the strong ministerial support. We've actually got strong prime ministerial support too. I've been privileged enough to stand alongside the Prime Minister twice now in respect of the SME agenda and the work that's going on there, supporting not just deficit reduction but growth. How can we not associate the SME agenda with the growth agenda? How can we not talk about procurement and sharing what we want to buy in a growth context? So I think it's equally important, deficit reduction and growth. An incredibly high profile and an agreed strategy. We also have, in the last month, a new Chief Procurement Officer in Bill Carruthers. Bill came from the Board of Accenture. He was then Commercial Director at the Home Office, so he's had long private sector experience, but also recent public sector experience. Bill's absolute focus is the strategic supplier programme. We have introduced in government Crown commercial representatives for the top. Some of you may be those suppliers who fall under the remit of the Crown commercial representative, and for government to act as a single customer, facing off to those large suppliers. And for the benefit, and actually really positive feedback from the suppliers, in that they welcome having a single discussion with government and not 20, and they can present their ideas to government in terms of reform to one person, but it also means that the divide and conquer landscape is being improved, because government is sharing its information about how suppliers do business with us. Bill is also, and I'm really delighted with this, about the development of the procurement profession and capability, the work which John started. And he's also passionate about learning, whether that be learning from other governments, learning from the private sector, or actually the wider public sector, and making sure that we're continuously sharing that knowledge. So I'm delighted to be working with Bill to continue the reforms that we've started. So what have been our priorities? We have a strategy, 2010 to 13, with those desired outcomes, increasing spend through the Government Procurement Service, higher percentage of trained staff, making sure we get enabling technology right in terms of looking at spend management tools, looking at e-sourcing tools, reduction in sourcing time and cost, which is something I've personally overseen as I have the government's ambition to spend 25% of its central government business with SMEs. Pipelines, sharing, it makes absolute sense to me that if we're going to buy something in government, we should tell the supply base that we intend to buy it, even if we later change our minds and we don't want it. so overseeing a programme of pipelines. And that last one is really important, and I'm sure all of those of you that work in procurement will agree that being perceived not just as the back office bit that sorts out the contract is absolutely fundamental to where we go as individuals and as a profession. And that procurement involvement, whether it's at the earliest stages of a project, contract management through to redesign, is absolutely fundamental. Okay, now the kind of nuts and bolts bit, and before you all close your eyes on the subject of EU procurement policy, we can't get away from the fact that we are governed in terms of law by the EU in this respect. I have an international team who have for the last year, or the last 18 months, been influencing and in the middle of renegotiating the main procurement directives. This opportunity doesn't come along very often. When the prospect came up, I said to the team, how long is it going to take? And they said, great news, Sally, it's only going to take half the time it took last time we did it. And I said, that's fantastic, how long did it take last time? And they said 10 years. 10 years from green paper to implementation, that's Brussels speed. So I think we're actually probably going to do it in 4 years, which is breakneck speed in terms of Brussels. We're negotiating every week. The good news is that the main directive, the UK set itself 10 negotiating asks last year. 8 of those 10 were met in the first draft proposals. As you can imagine, its main negotiating asks were about simplification, shorter timescales, getting clarity on things like dynamic purchasing systems, which at the moment, for those of you that understand the current regulations, are anything but dynamic. So the new rates will be certainly more dynamic. And we are constantly having to lobby against and fight back against, quite frankly, ridiculous proposals coming in from all corners, whether that be other member states, whether that be parliamentarians, MEPs in other member states. Whilst I've been on leave, the team have sifted through over 1,000 amendments from the politicians, quite a lot of which we didn't agree with. So it's a big ask to get this directive into a shape that we are content that takes us forward in terms of UK procurement, and certainly make sure that we stamp on things that quite frankly would take us backwards. And we're having to negotiate with member states who, some of the newer member states, actually really welcome more and more legislation. And so it's a constant balance. We've also got certainly one other piece of legislation, the Concessions Directive. We didn't want this. We didn't want another directive. We thought this should have been wrapped up into the main procurement directive. The French Commissioner was very keen on it, and the French have played a large part in ensuring that it goes ahead. If it goes ahead, we want it to be as light a touch as possible. And this is for a procurement contract where the supplier takes a charge or a levy, that's the definition of takes the risk and makes like a toll road, something like that. So we actually think if it comes in and it's very light touch, actually more of our procurement could use this light touch route. So we're working away to try and get the best for that. I've probably said enough about the EU. You may be asking about the two things that we didn't get in the 8 out of 10. One is a raising of thresholds, and we didn't get that because it's tied up with World Trade Organization agreements, and if we'd got a raising of the threshold at this point in time, we would have had to go back and unpick with all sorts of other countries' World Trade Organization agreements, and Brussels weren't very keen on that, but we have got a commitment to look at the exemptions very soon. We're also lobbying hard for an exemption for a mutual. This government very keen on new forms of contracting. We would like to see these new bodies given some sort of space within the procurement directives to be able to compete for contracts before they're subject to the full regime. As you can see, I start to get very excited about EU regulations, and I could go on for days, but we'll move on. Procurement supporting business and promoting growth. The back end of last year. We announced in the autumn statement a programme of procurement for growth, and this is all about the things it says on the left-hand side there. Making sure that you publish your pipeline. As I said, even if you haven't got absolute certainty that that pipeline will go ahead, I'm sure the suppliers in the audience would say, well, just give us some idea of what you're planning. We understand that things change, but just give us a forward look. And we did publish 13 pipelines in April with 70 billion and we're worth of opportunities, and we're also going to publish some more in the autumn. More importantly than that, it's not just about having a pipeline and suppliers having access to it, it's actually what you do with that information. So if you have a pipeline, you can then start to understand what this means for the UK. How much of X do I need? When do I need it? Who needs it? What does it mean for skills? What does it mean for technology? And those sorts of discussions at a sectoral level are beginning to take place, and some sectors are much more mature than others. We've had the construction and infrastructure pipeline for a couple of years already, and those discussions are quite mature. I'd love to get to a position, and we're aiming to get to a position where we get to those discussions on much more immature sectors and non-infrastructure sectors, some services sectors. I'll talk about SMEs and I'll talk about lean in a minute. One of the programmes I've overseen over the last 2 years, when Francis Maud came into power, he asked me to give him all of the procurement guidance that was available to practitioners. After some days of printing it off, we wheeled it down Whitehall in a wheelbarrow, and it was 6,500 pages of procurement guidance. I'm sorry to all of you practitioners out there who had to go through 6,500 pages of procurement guidance. Is it no wonder that we were struggling in some areas? And you produce more, we produce some of it, departments produce some of it. And Francis Maud said, we'll get rid of it. And we have systematically re-engineered the procurement process with a new lean sourcing manual, which is 50 pages long, and every procurement practitioner in government has the opportunity to be trained on the government's new lean sourcing process. And we hope that that will take out from most procurements about 40% of time. The baselines were fairly dire in terms of the timescales that we were taking to run procurements, particularly restricted procurements and competitive dialogue procurements. That's the picture of the new standard operating procedures, and the next slides, I'm not sure will just take you through the new lean sourcing process. And really culturally, it's a massive change for practitioners. The first training course that we sat through, we had practitioners saying to us, but why doesn't it say X? We have to do X. And we were saying, yes, we know you have to do X, and you know you have to do X, because you've been a procurement practitioner for 10 years. And they were saying, but it's not written down. And we were saying, no, and it's not written down for a purpose, because you know it. The things that we've written down are the things, the alarm bells, the risks. Because actually we want to remove some of these props, and we want to enable you to be the best that you can. That training is rolling out. Some of the principles, I'm looking at my colleagues if we're going to tell me to shut up quickly. Am I running out of time?
You're running out of time, totally fine.
Okay, I'll just... the SME programme, I know this is an important agenda item for today, and you've got the Federation of Small Business here later, with whom we're working very closely on this programme. The difference between SME programmes in the past and the SME programmes now is that one, we have a stated aspiration in terms of central government, 25% by the end of the Parliament. And we have adopted a range of measures in order to get towards that target. We have a Crown representative for small business, Stephen Abbott, who is indeed a voice at the top table, as it says on the graph. I can confirm that he certainly is the nagging voice at the top table whenever any plans come forward, and that's good because we need that challenge. We've launched Contracts Finder. Hands up, who's heard of Contracts Finder? 20-30%. It's the central government place to find out about government opportunities. It's also the central government place to find commercial intelligence. So it's not only got opportunities, it's also got pre-qualification documents, commercial documents, and contracts themselves. We've systematically crashed some of the barriers that existed. Francis Maud said, all these complaints I get about the pre-qualification process, why have we got it? And we said, well, it's sort of convenient to shortlist from a lot of suppliers to a few suppliers. And he said, so it's the convenience of the procurer. And we said, yes, it's also in the legislation for certain types of pre-qualified, narrowing down the number of suppliers. He said, get rid of it. If we don't have to have it, please get rid of it. So we duly got rid of it for procurements below £100,000, with the exception of construction. In the central government, there is no PQQ process. Is it harder for procurers? Yes. Does it mean that procurers have to be tighter in their specification, tighter in enabling suppliers to deselect themselves so you don't get 1,000 bids? Yes. Does it make it easier for suppliers? Absolutely. So the complaints, certainly from central government that we used to get about PQQs, are declining. A challenge function. So we absolutely opened up a challenge function in the form of mystery shopper, where we said to anybody, if you think a procurement is mad or bad or both, tell us and we'll investigate. It doesn't have to have broken the rules. It can just be, you can just think, this just doesn't stack up, tell us. We've now had, I think, over 250 cases in the last year, and in 80% of those cases there has been a change effected, either to a live procurement or to future procurements. You can do that anonymously, you can do that through a trade body, and we will investigate it. Some cases have no merit, but relative few cases. It's no cost to the supplier. Obviously a focus on data and spending, and actually making some specific commitments in terms of IT, in terms of the chunks of software that will be provided and the sizes of contracts. We're not there yet, we are improving, the numbers are improving, there's a long way to go, and particularly there's a way to go in counting indirect SME spend data. So the 25% aspiration includes indirect spend. Very few departments at this point in time can measure indirect spend. That's just a slide on Contracts Finder to give you an idea of the scale. We're getting about 90,000 page views, fairly stable per week. But as I say, it's more than, certainly if you're a supplier, it's more than opportunities. You can be using the intelligence in there to find out, well, who was awarded that contract last time, and under what conditions, and what does the specification say? It's a really rich source of commercial information. Another part of the SME programme, Solutions Exchange, we launched earlier in the year in March. Again, if you're a department, if you're a wider public sector body and you think, I've got this thing, this service that I need, I've got no idea what's out there in the marketplace, come and put something on Solutions Exchange. It's on the Cabinet Office website, and we can get responses from firms of all sizes, but it's been particularly responded to by small firms to let us know about what's out there. That's Stephen Allett's Twitter feed at SME Crown Rep, if you're Twitterists or Twitters. Not coming to the end, last but not least, on procurement capability. I've talked a bit, we're calling it licence to source, but that's all about the lean training, and that's rolling out in central government. We are turning our attention with Bill's arrival now to what we do in the contract and supply management space. Bill is very keen that we have a new set of terms and conditions for government, and we'll be looking to train on those, but also train on best practice contract management. Again, I'm sure if we gather together all of the guidance on how to do good contract management, we're probably getting a few thousand pages as well. The Commissioning Academy, I'll finish on that, certainly for colleagues in the wider public sector. This is, we're actually beyond the scope of the concept now, we're actually in pilot mode. again, we could spend all day talking about the difference between commissioning, or the similarities between commissioning and procurement. It doesn't matter. It's about getting services to users. And who does what bit, to me, is kind of irrelevant. The fact is, you need a requirement, you need to understand your users, you need to turn it into a service or a product. You may or may not need private sector involvement in that. You need to deliver a service, you need to manage that service. The Commissioning Academy is going to be available for the totality of the public sector, not just central government. We are piloting in, I think, 15 local authorities, health. It's a 9-day programme in the pilot. It will include days such as there will be a lean procurement element. There will also be a provider focus. There will also be a new models focus. There will also be a contract management element. The aim is to bring the best of breed together, to bring those people together, not just singletons, small teams in organisations with the backing of their senior leadership that can come out of the academy and do things differently and document and prove that they've done things differently. As I said, it's in pilot form. We'll go to full launch in 2013. And of course, we're working on a professional curriculum along with all the other professions in central government. I've talked about the Commissioning Academy. What keeps us going? Well, that lot kind of keeps me awake at night, mostly. The size of the prize, because the prize, however many billions we spend in public procurement, now it's less than it was, but it's still incredibly large, and there's always more to be done. Actually, I'm fired up by resistance to change and scepticism. That makes me get up in the morning, because I think there's always a way. To do things better. The continuous scrutiny certainly keeps us on our toes, and we love a positive profile. So I hope I haven't. I think everybody is still awake, and I hope I've tried to share some of my enthusiasm with you, and hopefully we've got a few moments for questions. Shall I stay here?
Yeah, stay there.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. I had 3 questions, they've been answered, so that's my list knocked off. Interesting. A lot more dynamic change going on, and positive change going on, than maybe all of us knew. So, to get a little bit further in there, does anybody have any questions for Sally? At the back.
Morning, Steve Williams from the Royal Bronx and Harefield and Ashes Foundation Trust. I was a bit late, public transport, sorry, so you might have already addressed this. You talked about lean sourcing. Just for a few seconds, I understand the concept of Lean Six Sigma. Could you just elaborate around lean sourcing? Because the notion of doing it quicker without compromising quality is quite intriguing.
Sure, I'd love to. Let's just go back to the slides. Okay, so what we did is we took the philosophy of lean in terms of eliminating wasteful practices and periods of inactivity or duplication. We mapped out the entire procurement process on a real live, or not live, but a competitive dialogue and a restricted process in 2 departments. All around the walls, we mapped out the entire process and looked at where the inactivity, where the duplication, where the approvals came in, and stripped all of them out and came up with a lean sourcing process that eliminates, not totally eliminates, but substantially reduces those wasteful practices. And then we set a mandate in central government that all but the most complex procurements will be completed in 220 days. Now that may sound a lot, but the average time for competitive dialogue, baseline, 440 days for competitive dialogue, so that's half. And we are tracking now, on a quarterly basis, every single OG procurement in central government, and whether it's meeting those timescales. The manual supports the new process. And you can see that, I mean, some of the principles you will recognise as good procurement. If you look at the right-hand side of that slide, advertise your requirement. There's a lot more of the work that's done up front. We found that a lot of the delay comes when there's a rush to ODU, and then delay comes because it wasn't right. Something, the requirement wasn't right, or the documents aren't prepared. Now, the criticism for that would be, well, are you just pushing it all up front? Well, you might be adding N% to the front of the process, but actually you can still substantially reduce the length. And actually GPS now, the majority of their procurements, and we're really practicing what we preach here, are coming in at 220-day timescale. So I'm happy to meet or whatever and talk in more detail about lean sourcing. The training programme we're running is in collaboration with Unipart and with SIPS. So we've got a lean focus and a procurement focus, and we've put them together. And I don't think hitherto it had ever been done before in this way. And certainly we think it can yield some substantial results.
Lovely, thanks, Sally.
Mark Jarrett, sorry.
Mark, if you just second, thank you.
Mark Jarrett, Sovereign Housing Association. One of the things I'm conscious from a government perspective is quite often it's about reducing costs now, which is all very laudable. But what it doesn't normally take into account is the cost to Britain's business plan, if you like. So in terms of reducing the average annual cost of the business plan, especially in construction and areas like that, it's all about getting things done cheaply now, getting homes built cheap, just use that as an example. Where in actual fact, by using the right components, the right materials and all the rest of it, actually things would have a longer life, need replacing less frequently and all that sort of thing. And that's an angle the government seems to keep missing really. It's all about sort of reducing initial costing. I appreciate that the budget deficit that they're trying to reduce, but in terms of Britain's long-term business plan, it doesn't seem to take into account the whole life cost implications of procurement activities.
It's a very good point and a well-made point. And what I haven't covered here, you may well be more familiar with it than I am, is the government's construction strategy, which I know does take into account whole life costing. There's much more of a focus on that in the construction area. I mean, I take your point. I think the size of that deficit when the current administration arrived, I think was such that there was quite a lot of low-hanging fruit to be had. I think what we're seeing though in some of the solutions that we're putting in place, particularly on the SME side, is that there certainly isn't a compromise in terms of what might happen in the longer term, because we're seeing the kind of innovation and creativity that we perhaps weren't seeing before. That's the point I made.
Do we have any more questions for Sam? One more at the back.
Hi, Colette Bennett from Equality South West. I'm just interested in the academy. I wondered if the curriculum is building in things like equality and the Social Value Act, because on the ground we're seeing evidence in commissioning and procurement that those sorts of things are not being considered.
Okay, another good question. So let's talk about the whole policy through procurement agenda. So again, I think when this government came into administration, there were something between 15 and 20 policies that procurers had to take into account before they procured anything. And we also got a lot of criticism from suppliers in terms of the number of questions they were asked about things that were not relevant to what they were bidding for. So we have, as a blanket policy, stripped out quite a lot of the requirements had been imposed. However, what that means is that the consideration of these policies needs to be completely focused on where it matters. And so that absolutely is where we are on these policy agendas at the moment. So in terms of the Social Value Act, will come into force next year, we will be launching a consultation on how we can do that in a way that doesn't impose significant burdens on business or public sector procurers, but meets the aspiration and the need of the legislation in a very targeted way. So very important that we don't lose the focus where it matters on these agendas, and welcome organisations like yours and others help in ensuring that we can